You know what's interesting? As much as people like to bang on about Barbarossa and the invasion of the East and the back and forth and blah, 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 the truth is no one talks about the Western Front. So let's have a talk about the Western Front. 1940, Germany,
and
Europe,
France. At that
Clash of the
time, the
Titans.
strength of the sides was similar, but the Allies had a significant long-term advantage and in the following years could field a much stronger army. Germany's only chance for victory was to defeat the Allies as soon as possible. It set out for an all-out attack. For the Western campaign, the Germans had less than 3 million men in 135 divisions. France had 2,200,000 men in 104
France
divisions.
big.
They were supported by the British Expeditionary Force with a size of 500,000 men. This made the Allied and the German forces roughly equal. France had prepared to defend its borders. Its southern flank was covered by the Rhine River and the Vosges Hills and needed few additional defenses. Further north, the Franco-German border didn't have the benefit of natural obstacles. Here, the French had built the strongest defenses on the Maginot Line, which was held by significant forces. The mobile divisions of the French army...
Whoa, the Maginot Line ends about here, doesn't it? In Hoi-4, it goes further up. What the hell, Paradox?
...and the British forces were on the Franco-Belgian border. They could be used to hold the northern part of the French border or to reinforce the Maginot Line or the Belgian army if Germany was to invade. The French had more tanks than the Germans, but they had dispersed many of them among their infantry and could only field 3 tank and 3 light mechanized divisions. The Germans had deployed their tanks in single units and had 10 tank divisions at hand. The Germans wanted to use this as the core element of their plan. At first, they would invade the Low Countries. This would have the Allies to commit their forces to Belgium, so they were not able to counter the real German attack in the south. The main German tank force would move through the Ardennes region and break through at the weakest part of the French defenses, then extend the offensive towards the coast and cut off the Allied forces. In order to move into the Low Countries, Germany would have to pass through their defensive lines. Germany...
The question was, were they 40-withs? That's the question.
...exploited the fact that these nations were not at war and had therefore not fully manned their defenses. They were able to launch an airborne assault and capture a section of both Dutch and Belgian lines. Now the paratroopers had to hold out until they would be reinforced by the land forces. Learning of the German invasion, the Allies now had to decide how to intervene in Belgium. They could move part of their forces into western Belgium, or they could deploy most of them in the central part of the country. They wanted to give Belgium maximum assistance and went for the latter. They also sent part of the troops to help the Netherlands, fully deploying their forces. In Belgium, the Germans were able to link up with their airborne troops. With Belgian defenses
Do you know what would be really interesting is to hear the first-hand accounts of troops that are either French or British in this specific offensive, and to see what they're thinking and what they're feeling and what they're going through. I think that'll be really fascinating.
The Belgian army began pulling back to central Belgium. In the north, the Germans advanced into the gap between the Belgian and the Dutch defenses and linked up with the paratroopers holding part of the Dutch line. This allowed them to move part of the tank forces behind the Dutch main line. When the Germans threatened to launch a terror bombing campaign against the Dutch cities, the Netherlands surrendered. At the same time, the tank divisions
I never knew
south
that.
had overrun Luxembourg and pushed aside the Allies.
So they actually gave up early, hence the reason why the guy in Hoi-4 has that defeatist trait, where he has a 20-30% less surrender limit. Oh my god, that all backs up now.
Screening units. Soon they reached the prepared French defensive lines. The Germans launched a massive aerial bombardment. The French second-rate divisions could not withstand the attack by the best German units, and the Germans were able to breach the defenses. The French thought that the Germans wanted to outflank the main body of the Maginot Line by moving south and concentrated on that direction. Seeing that the French western flank was barely covered, the German tank commanders took a risk and moved forward.
Why would they think that? Why would they think that they were going to encircle the Maginot Line? But if the majority of the army is in Belgium, surely they'll think, well, you're going to try and encircle the most of the army in Belgium, not the one around the Maginot. So why did they think they were going to push south?
Without waiting for their infantry. The Allies were surprised by the German breakthrough, but they now knew that this was the main German attack. They began redeploying their reserves to that area. At the same time, they ordered the troops in Belgium to fall back.
Where are the reserves? There's one there. There's like 2 here. Where are the reserves? French. What the hell?
in order to put them into a better position and free up some divisions.
Who is the player playing France right now? Seriously. Oh my god.
The Allies did not know whether the Germans were moving towards Paris or the Channel coast and had to cover both directions. For that, they could use the 3 tank divisions located in the area.
This is interesting. He's numbered the divisions.
But the question was, where should they make the stand? The French believed that the German tanks will wait for their infantry to consolidate and therefore won't be moving very fast. As a result, they believed that they had the time to prepare defensive positions on the Oise River.
The 6 is
The German
Guderian.
command had indeed ordered their tanks to slow down, but the German tank commanders had ignored the orders and continued to advance. They moved much faster than the French had expected, and the Germans encountered the French units as they were still assembling. This caught the 1st French Armored Division off guard and it was destroyed, while the 2nd Division was dispersed and overrun. The 4th Tank Division was not on the main axis of the German advance and was able to cover the assembly of the French troops on the Paris direction. The German tanks now needed for their infantry and supplies to catch up. As a result, the advance of the German tanks slowed down, and in the following days they were able to take only limited territory. The Allies were in the process of finishing the withdrawal in Belgium and they were able to deploy troops to cover the Paris direction. But they hadn't had the time to put their troops between the Germans and the Channel. They decided...
You know, I know I keep comparing to Hoi 4 here, but in a way, it kind of makes sense why they didn't want to put divisions directly in front of the tank divisions here initially. Because you think about it, in Hoi 4, when you're railroading, you deorg your divisions. So you kind of, when they get deployed to the front line, they need to prepare for what they're going to be fighting in front of them. You know, you can't just throw a division at the front line and just hope for the best, you know. I'm talking to you, boy, who makes 7-width infantry.
that their best hope was to attack the German spearhead from 2 sides and encircle it. However, their light mechanized divisions were still pinned down on the front, and with 2 of their tank divisions destroyed, they lacked the sufficient strength. As a result, the Allies were only able to undertake limited counterattacks. First one was by the 4th Tank Division, but it didn't have much effect. Meanwhile, the Germans had consolidated their lines and finished the resupply. They resumed the offensive in full strength, and with little Allied troops to cover the Channel direction, they soon reached the sea. The Allies launched an attack at Arras, but it was only of limited success. The Germans turned north with the intention of capturing the Channel ports
What's TK?
and cutting
And
the
V?
Allies off from their supply lines. This move threatened the Allied units with outflanking, and they had to send many of the units they had cadet for the counterattack.
Damn, they moved
to
so
extend the
quickly.
flanks north. As a result, the northern force was unable to launch the counterattack. At the same time, their forces in the south held their positions to have a chance to link up with the possible counterattack from the main French lines. The Germans ordered their units in the west of the pocket on defensive to meet the possible Allied breakout attempt. The French were deploying forces for an attack from the south, but as more of German infantry arrived to the sector, they needed more troops. But with the troops in the north without
TK is Tommy.
access to supply and being threatened with encirclement, it was impossible to wait any longer. Therefore, it was decided to evacuate the troops. They could
Plot twist. Tommy's great granddad was called Tommy as well. Eastern Front story, lads.
attempt to break out or be pulled out by sea. As the Allies had become too weak to attempt a breakout, it was decided to pull their troops out of the ports still under their control. The Allies began the retreat to the sea.
No,
Germans
don't let them
attempted
close
to
the
break their
pocket.
lines and cut off part of their
No.
forces.
What were they
As the Allied
thinking?
forces were leaving, the Belgian army was unable to resist the Germans on its own and surrendered. The Germans were able to cut off and encircle part of the French forces. Other troops managed to hold a solid front, reached the sea, and proceeded with the evacuation. The Germans pulled most of their forces back and started to prepare for their second attack on France. More than 300,000 Allied soldiers were able to be evacuated, but all of their equipment was lost. As the Allies weren't able to replace it in time, most of these soldiers didn't take part in the next phase.
Would it be kind of cool if there was a way of retreating in Hoi 4 that made you move and retreat faster, like twice as fast movement speed, but as you ran away, you lost your equipment. Therefore, it would kind of like, it would reenact what happened at Dunkirk. You know what I mean? That'd be kind of cool, wouldn't it?
Of the Battle of France. Now the Germans outnumbered the French. The French were holding the positions on the Somme and Eun rivers. However, the Germans had established several bridgeheads which weakened the defense. To overcome that, the French could pull the main forces back to the next river line around Paris, but they decided against it. The French wanted to use the defensive advantage provided by the rivers in northern France to inflict significant casualties on the advancing German army in the hope that it would run out of steam. In order to do that, the French needed to avoid the breakthrough by the German tanks at all costs. The Germans did not want to give France any time to recover, and as soon as part of their forces got ready, they attacked. At first, the French plan worked and they were able to fall back in an organized manner, but soon the first breakthrough happened. The German tanks broke through the French lines and reached the river Seine. The French were able to destroy the breaches and block their advance, but the German tanks now moved towards the sea and cut off part of the Allied forces. By then, the other part of the German forces had joined the attack. The French were able to slowly pull back, but eventually the German tanks were able to break through.
Here's a question. Are just tank divisions just really effective on the offensive, or is the lack of capabilities of the French army to deal with them? That's where I'm kind of not getting my head around here. Because it seems like whenever a tank division makes a spearhead, it gets straight through immediately. No resistance. Bam, straight through. You know? And it makes me think, is the issue here that they're just super effective? Is it the tanks just OP? Tanks OP? Or is it just the fact that the French do not have the weapons and the capabilities to actually deal with them? I don't know.
The French troops west of Paris had been encircled and destroyed, and as a result, the Germans were able to cross the Seine unopposed, and the French lacked the troops to contain them. The French command was afraid that now their troops were going to be encircled, and ordered them to break contact with the Germans and move further south to make a stand on the Loire River.
Oh, wow.
The defense of Paris was abandoned. But the withdrawal broke the cohesion of the French armies and the German tanks were able to fully break through into the French rear. Germany wanted not to allow the French forces to escape.
Can you imagine what they were telling these tank commanders here? They were like, just keep going, just keep going, just keep going, just keep going. Don't care about how quick you... Because the truth is when they get to the peace conference, when they get to the negotiation table, they're going to be like, well, right now we have tanks breaking into the southern part of France. You know what I mean? I guess at this point they realize that the French have no capabilities of counterattacking. So at this point, just snake all the way over France. Snake all the France guys. Convert all divisions to horses and just go everywhere.
Escape and attempted to cut off and destroy as much of them as possible. With most of the French army moving on foot, the tanks could easily outmaneuver them. They pushed deep into the French rear, and many of the French units were caught or bypassed and dispersed. With most of the French army in the west in retreat, the largest portion of intact French forces were behind the Maginot Line. They had pulled a lot of
Look at that one tank there! Snake me boy! Snake!
Which could pose a threat to Germans. The Germans set out to destroy them. They attempted to overwhelm the French defenders by attacks from all directions. Their main force would move in from the west, while the tanks outflanked the line from the south. At the same time, they launched attacks through the weakened line from north and east. Meanwhile, the French had reached the Loire River in force and attempted to make a stand. However, they were unable to cover all the crossings, and on the same day, the pursuing German forces crossed the river. The French continued the retreat. At the same time, the German tanks overran the French forces retreating in the north.
Overrun.
The French in the east were unable to form a solid front.
Oh, wow, I've just realized they've got rid of the overrun thing on screen. You know the pop-up, you just got overrun. They got rid of it. You just got the little helmet thing now. Oh, that's sad. I used to love overrun.
Offensive from several directions, and the Germans were able to encircle them and push them into a small pocket, making them surrender. Only a small part of the French forces was able to survive the retreat, and the odds had become too unfavorable to continue the war. Although the French were successfully resisting attempts by Italy to cross the Alps, they were unable to resist Germany. They agreed to German terms and signed the armistice, which would come into effect 2 days later.
Anyway guys, you enjoy that? That was cool. If you want to check out that channel, that is Eastery. He makes fantastic videos. Yeah, oh guys, honestly, hand on heart, that was really good. I enjoyed that.